Deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina lies a county that earned a dark, enduring nickname during the Civil War, Bloody Madison. Here, the conflict stayed small and intimate, a brutal struggle fought door to door by people who had known each other their entire lives. The geography of the county dictated its social fracture. Down in the valley, the town of Marshall served as a Confederate stronghold for affluent elites. But up in the isolated Shelton Laurel Valley, poor subsistence farmers wanted nothing to do with secession. This split created a volatile borderland where kinship ties weighed more heavily than a nation-state. By the winter of 1862, life in the mountains was reduced to a matter of sheer biological survival. A brutal freeze hit the region, and the Union blockade had severed the supply of salt. Without it, families had no way to cure meat and faced imminent starvation. Confederate authorities in Marshall controlled the remaining salt stores and used the supply as a weapon. They intentionally denied rations to the Unionist families of Shelton Laurel, attempting to starve the mountain resistance into submission. In January 1863, a band of 50 to 60 Unionist men and Confederate deserters from the valley reached their breaking point. They rode down into Marshall and took their salt by force. The raid quickly escalated from theft to intimidation. The group ransacked several buildings, specifically targeting the home of the local Confederate commander, Colonel Lawrence Allen, while he was away on duty. The weaponization of a basic necessity guaranteed the war would become a violent, personal struggle for survival. Colonel Allen returned home to a personal tragedy. His children, already sick with scarlet fever when the raiders harassed his family, died shortly after the attack. Driven by grief and class outrage, Allen and his cousin, Lieutenant Colonel James A. Keith, mobilized the 64th North Carolina Regiment. This was a unit of local draftees, essentially neighbors forced to police their own neighbors, now ordered to launch a punitive expedition into Shelton Laurel. The regiment unleashed a brutal campaign of terror against the valley's civilians. To extract information, they whipped and hanged an 85-year-old woman until she was nearly dead. They beat an intellectually disabled girl and left her tied to a tree in the snow. These officers had effectively hijacked the authority of the Confederate Army to execute a localized blood feud against their own community. The soldiers eventually rounded up 15 men and boys. Most shared the same last name, Shelton, and almost none were actual participants in the Marshall raid. The captives were either too old to fight or too young to be drafted. Keith maintained the fiction that the prisoners were being marched to Tennessee for trial. But when 2 prisoners escaped during the trek, he abandoned any pretense of military law. Keith marched the remaining 13 captives off the road and into a snowy mountain clearing that formed a natural amphitheater. He then ordered them down to their knees. The psychological horror peaked as 13-year-old David Shelton watched his father and brothers shot dead beside him. Wounded in both arms, the boy clutched an officer's legs and begged to go home to his mother. When the soldiers hesitated to fire on a child, Keith threatened to shoot any man who refused to pull the trigger. The firing squad obeyed. David Shelton was shot 8 more times. All 13 victims were executed on the spot and dumped into a shallow, hastily dug trench. This was a systematic, point-blank execution of an entire family network carried out by neighbors they had known their entire lives. The following morning, the families discovered the gravesite. A matriarch known as Granny Judy loaded the remains of her relatives onto an ox sled. She hauled the bodies 2 miles up the valley to the family cemetery for burial. The massacre shattered the local kin network, leaving a valley of widows, aunts, and orphans to survive the remainder of the war isolated and unprotected. In the years following the war, the survivors sought accountability through the courts. They found none. Friddle Allen walked away from the murders with nothing more than a 6-month military suspension. Lieutenant Colonel Keith was arrested in 1867, but he escaped from a civilian jail in 1869. He disappeared from the region and vanished from the historical record entirely. No individual ever faced a jury or served a sentence for the 13 murders at Shelton Laurel. This is the legacy of the massacre. When civil order collapses and national wars become local feuds, Traditional justice systems are powerless to heal the generational wounds left behind.
Thanks for watching. Please join us again next time for more history from the mountains. Don't forget to like and subscribe,